April 1945. A frozen field outside Bitburg, Germany. Sergeant Daniel Kovacs walked across the muddy ground with his squad behind him. He'd been told there were bodies, American bodies. He'd been told to come quick and bring account. What he found stopped him cold. 12 men, lined up in a shallow ditch they had dug themselves. Each one shot in the back of the head. Their hands were tied with German signal wire. Their boots had been taken. Snow was starting to fall on their faces. 12 dog tags, 12 mothers, 12 telegrams that hadn't been sent yet. Kovacs counted them twice. He'd seen dead Americans before. He'd carried them out of hedgerows in Normandy. He'd zipped them into bags after the Bulge, but he'd never seen anything like this. Not a battle, not a firefight. An execution. Cold, methodical. 12 American prisoners of war shot for refusing an order from an SS colonel. The colonel was still alive. He'd been captured that same morning, 3 miles down the road, sitting in a farmhouse drinking real coffee while his men burned papers in the yard. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He surrendered with a smile. His name was Standartenführer Heinrich Krause, and he had something to say. He told the American captain who took him prisoner that the 12 dead men had been killed lawfully. He said it was their own fault. He said they'd refused to dig defensive trenches for the German line. He said the rules of war were clear. He said he had nothing to be ashamed of. The case landed on General Patton's desk by the next afternoon. He had to choose. Hand Krause to a war crimes tribunal that might take 2 years to convict him, or do something faster, something the law might not forgive. This is the story of what Patton said to the SS colonel who executed 12 American boys for refusing to pick up a shovel. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when American soldiers had to look evil in the eye and decide what justice was worth. To understand what Patton walked into, you need to understand the road that led there. By the spring of 1945, the German army was finished. Everyone knew it. Everyone except the men still wearing the Death's Head insignia. The SS hadn't surrendered. The SS hadn't pulled back. The SS was still doing what the SS had always done: killing. The 12 Americans came from a reconnaissance unit attached to the Third Army. They'd been pushing toward the Rhine when their jeep was ambushed at a crossroads on April 7th. Most were wounded. None were killed in the fight. They were taken, marched 4 miles east, held in a barn behind the German line for 2 nights without food. That's where Krause found them. His unit was building a defensive position. He was short on labor. He was short on time. He looked at the 12 American prisoners. He looked at the frozen ground. And he gave them a shovel. The senior man among the prisoners was Sergeant William Carter, Pittsburgh, 26 years old, steel mill worker before the war. He'd been in Europe for 14 months. He had a wife named Margaret and a baby boy he'd never met. Carter looked at the shovel. He looked at the German line he'd be helping to build. He looked at his 11 men. And he said, no. The Geneva Convention was clear on this. Prisoners of war could not be forced to perform labor that aided enemy combat operations. Building defensive trenches against your own army was exactly the kind of work the convention forbade. Carter knew the rule. He'd been briefed on it before he ever shipped out. He told the German interpreter, polite and steady, "We can't dig those trenches, sir. It's against the rules of war." The interpreter told Krause. Krause didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He nodded. He told the men to dig a different kind of trench, a shorter one, just deep enough to lay down in. Carter understood what was being asked. He looked at his men, 11 faces, some of them 18 years old. He said it again, quieter this time. "We can't dig those trenches." The next morning, all 12 men were marched out to that field. They were given shovels. They dug their own grave. Krause watched the whole thing, smoking a cigarette, occasionally checking his wristwatch. When the trench was deep enough, he lined them up at the edge. Then he ordered his men to fire. He told one of his junior officers afterward that it had been a matter of discipline. The officer's name was Untersturmführer Fritz Lehmann, 23 years old, from Munich. Lehmann would survive the war. He would be the one who told American investigators what happened, 4 months later, in a cell outside Frankfurt. But that was later. In the moment, on that field, 12 American boys were dead, and Krause was already walking back to his car. Sergeant Kovacs found them 3 days later, when the line moved forward. He was the one who untied their hands. He was the one who collected their dog tags. He laid them out on a clean piece of canvas in the back of a half-track, and he counted them 3 more times before he made the call to his lieutenant. The lieutenant was Daniel Voss, 28 years old, schoolteacher from Vermont before the war. Voss looked at the dog tags for a long time. He didn't say anything. Then he picked up the radio. The report went up. Lieutenant to captain, captain to major, major to colonel. Each man read it. Each man went quiet for a moment. Each man passed it up. By the time it reached Corps headquarters, the SS colonel was already in American custody. Krause had been pulled out of his farmhouse without a struggle. He'd been searched, photographed, fingerprinted. He'd been put in a holding cell with 3 other German officers, and he had told everyone who would listen that he had done nothing wrong. The captain who interrogated him was named Robert Hellman, Brooklyn, 31 years old, German-American. His parents had come over in 1922. He spoke the language like a native, which was why they'd given him the job. Hellman sat across the table from Krause and asked him plainly why he had executed 12 American prisoners. Krause smiled. He said the prisoners had refused a lawful order. He said the laws of war permitted the execution of prisoners who refused to comply with reasonable instructions. He said he was a soldier doing his duty. Hellman closed his notebook. He looked at Krause for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked out of the room without saying another word. Outside in the hallway, Hellman stopped and put his hand against the wall. Another officer asked him if he was all right. Hellman said, "He thinks he's going to walk away from this." The room went silent. By that evening, the report had reached Major General Walton Walker. Walker read it twice. He picked up the phone. The call went straight to 3rd Army headquarters. By morning, it was sitting on Patton's desk. The men around Patton expected the standard procedure. SS officer accused of war crime. Document the evidence. Hand the prisoner to the War Crimes Tribunal at Nuremberg or wherever the trials would be held. Let the lawyers handle it. That was the system. That was the law. But Patton read the file all the way through. He looked at the 12 names. He looked at the photograph of the trench. He looked at Krause's smug, self-satisfied face in the booking photo. And he did not pick up the phone to call the tribunal. He picked it up to call his driver. The drive from headquarters to the holding facility was 40 minutes. Patton said nothing the whole way. The driver later said the general sat with the file on his lap and his hand resting on the cover, like a priest carrying a Bible to a sickbed. Outside the window, the German countryside was starting to bloom. April, spring, 12 American boys in a ditch. What would you do? If 12 of your own men were lying in a frozen field with their hands tied, shot for the crime of obeying their training. If the man who ordered it was sitting in a clean cell, smiling, certain he would walk free, if the law said wait. If your gut said no, what would you do? Patton's jeep rolled into the holding facility just before noon. He got out slowly. He nodded to the MPs at the gate. He walked into the building without his usual entourage. Just one aide, just one translator, just one man with a clipboard. He walked past the desk where Hellman was sitting. Hellman stood up. Patton looked at him and said one thing, "Show me the colonel." They took him to the cell. Krause was sitting on the cot, polishing the buttons of his uniform with the corner of his sleeve. He looked up when Patton entered. He recognized the face. Every German officer in Europe knew Patton's face. He stood up and stiffened to attention. He was a believer in formality, even now. Patton looked at him for a long moment. He counted. 12. He counted again. Then he asked one question, through the translator. Quiet voice. Too quiet. Why? Krause began the same speech he'd given Hellman. He talked about the laws of war. He talked about lawful orders. He talked about discipline. He talked about duty. The translator translated. Patton listened without moving. When Krause finished, the room was silent. Every American within earshot had stopped breathing. Patton took one step forward. "Let me tell you about discipline, Colonel," he said. The translator caught up. Krause's face was calm. He thought he was about to be lectured. He was used to lectures. "You executed 12 American boys because they refused to dig a trench. You said it was a lawful order. You said they broke discipline. You stood in a field and watched them die for the crime of remembering their training." Patton paused. "You're a soldier, I'll give you that. You wore that uniform for 15 years. You stood by your men. You followed your chain of command. There's a part of soldiering in there I can almost respect. Almost." Krause's chin lifted slightly. He thought he was being honored. "But here's reality, Colonel. Discipline without conscience is not discipline. It's just cruelty wearing a clean uniform. Those boys you shot, they had more discipline than you'll ever understand. They knew the rule. They knew what saying no would cost them. And they said no anyway. Because that's what an American soldier does when an enemy asks him to help kill his own brothers." The room went silent again. Even the translator paused before speaking. "You think you followed the law of war. You didn't. You read the part you wanted to read. You skipped the rest. You shot prisoners. You shot men with their hands tied. You shot 18-year-old kids from Indiana and Ohio and Pennsylvania, and you smoked a cigarette while you did it." Patton took another step closer. "And here's what you didn't understand. Those weren't 12 boys. Those were 12 American families. 12 mothers who were going to get a telegram. 12 fathers who were going to take down the service flag from the front window. One of those boys had a son he never met. A baby in Pittsburgh. That baby is going to grow up without his daddy because you needed a trench dug." Krause did not respond. "I came here to look you in the eye. I wanted to see if there was a man in there, anywhere, some shred of a soldier who knew what he'd done was wrong. I don't see one. I see a clerk in a death's head cap." Patton stepped back. "You're going to face a tribunal, Colonel. You're going to face it because the law says you do. Not because you deserve the mercy of a courtroom. You don't. But we are not you, and we will not become you. We didn't fight this war to become them." That last line. That was the line. Patton turned to the captain at the door. His voice was low. "I want every piece of evidence cataloged. I want sworn statements from every man in his unit. I want the testimony of his junior officer, layman, on paper before sundown. I want the names of those 12 boys engraved on a marker, and I want it placed where they fell. And I want the personal effects returned to every family, by hand, by an officer, not in the mail." He paused at the cell door. "And one more thing. The corporal who found the bodies, Sergeant Kovacs, I want him reassigned to the team that notifies the families. He's going to deliver one of those flags himself, because he's the one who untied their hands. He earned it." Then Patton walked out. This was the third option. He didn't bend the law to shoot Krause where he stood. He didn't bury the case in paperwork. He didn't let the tribunal handle it cold and slow and impersonal from 1,000 miles away. He turned the case into a hand-delivered act of remembrance. He made every step of the justice personal. He put names on a marker. He put a flag in a mother's hand. He made sure the man who found the bodies was the same man who told the families. Krause was tried at Dachau later that year. He was convicted of the murder of 12 American prisoners of war. He was hanged in 1946. He never apologized. He never acknowledged the names of the men he killed. But every one of those 12 names was read aloud at his trial. Patton made sure of that. Years later, Sergeant Daniel Kovacs told the story to his grandson on a porch in upstate New York. He was 82 years old. His hands shook a little when he held his coffee. The grandson was 12. The boy had asked about the war. Kovacs almost never talked about the war. But that day, for some reason, he did. He kept one thing from that field, one dog tag. The Army had let him keep it because the family had asked. Sergeant William Carter's tag. The Pittsburgh boy, the steel mill worker. Carter's widow had kept the original, the duplicate, scratched and a little bent, sat in a wooden box on Kovacs's dresser for 60 years. The grandson asked him why he'd kept it. Kovacs was quiet for a moment. "Because I was the one who untied his hands," he said. "And General Patton told me that was a sacred thing. He told me a man who unties an American soldier's hands has a duty to remember him forever. So that's what I do. Every morning when I shave, I look at that tag and I say his name, because somebody has to." He looked out at the fields behind the house. "I delivered the flag to his mama in 1945. She lived in a little row house in Pittsburgh. She opened the door, and she saw my uniform, and she knew. She didn't cry right away. She asked me if I had been with him at the end. I told her no, but I told her I'd been the one to bring him home, and she put her hand on my face, and she said, 'Thank you for that, son.' That's when I understood what kind of General Patton was. He didn't just fight for the living. He fought for the dead, too. He made sure they came home with their names on them." Patton never wrote about the visit to the cell, never mentioned Krause in his diary, never gave a speech about the 12 men. He didn't need to. He'd done what he came to do, and he moved on to the next thing. But the marker still stands on that field outside Bitburg. 12 names, a small American flag, a line at the bottom that reads, "They said no." That was the day Sergeant Kovacs learned what we were really fighting for. Not territory, not victory. The right of an American soldier to say no to evil and be remembered for it. If you had been Patton, would you have let the tribunal handle Krause cold and slow, or would you have made the justice personal the way he did? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories about the moments when Patton's word became the difference between justice and forgetting, make sure to subscribe,